Ian A. Stewart was a child actor who grew up to direct stage plays and television. He enjoyed writing and decided to base a script on some things he learned from a few of his friends. One friend was a world-renowned ventriloquist who worked with autistic children. The ventriloquist told him about a child who wouldn't speak to anyone except the dummy. The other friend was a child psychiatrist. One of his patients was a socially awkward boy who drew monsters he thought he could control. The kid was often teased for being different, and when this happened, he would draw the monsters killing the person who bullied him. After that, the person would be dead to the child, who would never acknowledge them again. The child called these monsters troglodytes, because he couldn't pronounce troglodytes. Troglodytes are humanoid cave dwellers. Stewart took these things and added another element, Alice in Wonderland. He wrote a story about a young boy named Jamie, roughly 8 years old. Within a forest near his house, he found a huge pit where a pack of troglodytes lived. He had a teddy bear that told him he needed to feed the troglodytes, so he would lure his enemies to the pit and knock them in for the troglodytes to eat. Jamie was a mentally disturbed child, and all the things, from the evil teddy to the troglodytes, were in his head. Stewart called the script Teddy. He shopped the script around with no luck. Most studios turned it down due to the hints of child sexuality. There were some moments where Jamie did some inappropriate things to members of the opposite sex. Paramount was interested, but due to a mix-up, the script accidentally landed on the unsolicited pile and was returned to Stewart without anyone looking at it. The script eventually made its way to producer John F. Bassett. Bassett was interested, but had the script read by a consulting psychiatrist before agreeing to take on the picture. Bassett was an ex-tennis and squash player who started Amulet Productions. Wanting to take advantage of the new regulations in the Canadian film industry, he produced 2 hockey films, Face Off and Paperback Hero. At the time, Canadian exploitation, or Canucksploitation, was in full swing. Due to a law that was put in place to help boost Canadian filmmakers, many were taking advantage of this to make their features, which is what they intended. I talk about this in a little more detail in my Ghost Keeper video. Bassett bought the script from the writer and began to acquire funds to make the film. He liked that it could be sold as both a horror film and a drama about a disturbed child. Producer Bennett Fodey also joined the production. They managed to raise about $750,000 to $1 million for the production. With the budget in place, they began looking into casting and finding a director. The first thing they went for was the lead character of Jamie. They were looking to find an actor and chose about 5 kids that they felt would be great. Bassett was having a hard time finding a director due to the quota system. Since they'd be making this under the Canadian tax bill, the director, as well as a certain percentage of the cast and crew, had to be Canadian. Bassett called the Directors Guild of Canada and asked if they had any directors there. The person put him on hold and turned to the only other person in the office at the time, Lew Lehman. They said, "Hey Lew, you want to direct a movie?" And he said sure. When Lehman came on board, he wanted to do things his way. Stewart presented the director with the 5 boys they had found for the lead, but he dismissed them all without even seeing them. He went over the script and made some changes. Because of the larger budget, the producers were worried. They decided that in order to get a return on investment, as well as hopefully make a profit, they allowed Lehman to make changes to the film. Slasher films like Halloween were exploding at the time, so they started to shift the focus of the film to be less drama and more horror. They were hoping to have the next Canucksploitation hit like Black Christmas or Prom Night. Lehman changed the age of the lead from 8 to 12. Stewart was furious. This altered the entire dynamic of what he wrote. The film would now be dealing with an adolescent instead of a prepubescent boy. It was a major difference. The relationship between the babysitter and an 8-year-old would be drastically different than that of a 12-year-old. In the script, Jamie called the monsters troglodytes, but Lehman changed it to trolologs. Troglodytes was a mispronunciation, but trolologs was childish. It was a minor change, yes, but also very petty. Stewart thought it insulted the character's intelligence. The biggest change was making the troglodytes and Teddy real. In the script, the pit in the forest was real, but Jamie created the trolologs in his head. Stewart was frustrated with what was happening to his script. There was more material that focused on Jamie's mental state that Lehman removed because it was considered too intellectual for a horror film. The new script was significantly different from what Stewart wrote. It would revolve around the young, disturbed kid Jamie. His parents were going out of town to look for a new home after the father accepted a job in Seattle, so they leave him with a babysitter while they're gone. During this time, Jamie becomes fascinated by the sitter and reveals how he's been feeding his enemies to a pit filled with monsters he calls trolologs. He's doing this because his teddy bear Teddy is telling him to. With the changes in place, casting resumed. For the role of 12-year-old Jamie, Lehman cast Canadian actor Sammy Snyders. Snyders was a 14-year-old boy who they felt brought the right intensity to the project. Snyders was an energetic child, and at age 7, his parents enrolled him in various sports and activities to burn off that energy. After that, they enrolled him in dance classes, which he loved. He was in the same class as a young unknown Mike Myers. While dancing, a talent agent told his parents to put that kid in film, which they did. He was in numerous Canadian TV commercials, his most memorable being for Milkmate.
So your chocolate milk tastes Milkmate chocolatey. Right to the bottom.
He was in a few TV shows like The King of Kensington and The Baxters. He was also cast to play Tom Sawyer in Huckleberry Finn and Friends. The role was originally offered to Michael J. Fox, but he turned it down to do a show called Family Ties. When Snyders met Lehman, he was cast almost immediately. While looking for the rest of the cast and location scouting, Snyders read the novelization of Teddy by John Galt, which was based on Ian Stewart's original screenplay. The book was listed as now an utterly horrifying film, which hadn't even been shot yet. Even though this was a Canadian production, they chose to shoot in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, an idyllic American town. The reason being was that John Bassett's daughter went to Wayland Academy in Beaver Dam, and he loved it there. They hired a young woman to play the role of Sandy, the babysitter. They shot with Jamie and this unnamed actress for a few days before letting her go because she wasn't the right fit. They ended up bringing in Jeannie Ellis, who was overjoyed to take on the role. She was in a few movies like Power Play and By Design, but they were small roles, and this would be her first lead. She also was in the show King of Kensington, but not in the same episodes as Snyders. The town of Beaver Dam was very happy to have them filming there. They hired some locals for the extras, as well as for the crew. Filming started in the fall of 1979. While Teddy was filming in the US, Stewart was writing another film for Bassett in Toronto. The library scenes were shot at the Wayland Academy. The pit was built in a wooded farm area located just outside of Beaver Dam. It was 30 by 40 feet wide and 18 feet deep. The design team built a framework around the hole and reinforced it with plywood in order to be able to support the filming equipment. For the tralalogs, they originally hired local children to wear the costumes. Unfortunately, the suits were heavy and hot, which made them all very uncomfortable. Some of the kids were suffering from heat exhaustion and threw up in their masks or passed out. It was clear the kids weren't going to work, so they let them go and hired a team of little people to wear the costumes. The dead body the police find was the director's wife. The girl who gets killed by the tralalogs was the director's daughter, Jennifer. The boy who gets killed was John C. Bassett, the producer's son. As a way to vent some of his energy when they weren't shooting, on Saturday nights, Snyders would dance at the local disco club. As filming progressed, there was a major problem: the nudity. Within the film, there were a few scenes that required nudity. They weren't gratuitous, but rather essential to the plot. The problem was Lehman's wife was on set while they were filming, and she didn't approve, so he just skipped those scenes for fear of upsetting her. Lehman seemed to want the film to be more comedy than horror. Some of the scenes are downright goofy, and in no way could be interpreted as scary.
Sorry about that, Miss Oliphant. But like my father says, we all have to go sometime.
The film has bizarre tonal shifts, from Jamie being downright creepy to over-the-top silly moments. On top of all the other changes, Lehman also decided to change the ending. Originally it was going to end with the camera panning out to see Jamie in a psychiatrist's office. Sandy was still alive, and it's revealed that everything that takes place after he gets slapped was all in his head. It was much more in line with the drama about the disturbed child, instead of a horror film. The tralalogs were supposed to be a figment of Jamie's imagination, but Lehman changed it so they were real. This made the film less a dramatic chiller about the inner workings of a kid with mental problems, and turned it into a messed up kid getting revenge in humorous ways, until finally getting his comeuppance at the end. The new ending was Jamie discovering someone else had a pit with tralalogs, and he gets a taste of his own medicine. While Lehman butted heads with the writer and the producers, the cast and crew liked him. He had a jovial sense of humor and made the shoot an enjoyable experience. As filming was coming to a close, Lehman hired composer Victor Davies to work on the score. Filming ran for a few weeks. After that, they moved back to Toronto to work on post-production. Now back at home, the producers looked at the footage and fired Lehman. Davies called up Lehman to talk to him about being fired. Lehman told him not to worry and that these things will work themselves out. They brought in Stewart to shoot some additional scenes, mainly the missing nude scenes. While the film largely was about Jamie and the tralalogs, he's never in any scenes with them. They shot all of his scenes in Beaver Dam and planned to film the Trolologs in Toronto. After the producers saw the design for the Trolologs, they thought they looked like bad Halloween costumes. They had the art director redesign them for the scenes they needed to shoot. The new costumes look much better, although we never really see them because they're mostly in the dark. None of the Trololog costumes survived the shoot because they filled them full of holes in the finale. Now with all the footage, the producers tried working with an editor, but couldn't make sense of what Lehman shot. He storyboarded everything in his head, so they had nothing to reference, and the whole thing looked like a giant mess. After spending time with the footage, they finally gave up and hired him back to fix it. Lehman then put together his cut of the film. He sent a work print off to Davies, who was able to score the film in 3 sessions. He wanted it to sound like a Hollywood production, so he sank a chunk of his own money into hiring a larger pool of musicians. Davies was friends with the secretary at the studio, who told him that when he delivered the score, Fode was overjoyed. He said they got a $50,000 film score for only $10,000. He then spoke to Lehman, who told him the score was too good for the movie. Amulet Productions worked out a deal with New World Pictures to distribute the film, only they insisted on changing the name from Teddy to The Pit. The Pit was released on October 3rd, 1981, and did not do well. The weird tonal shifts didn't work for critics or audiences at the time, and it quickly disappeared. As things were coming to a close, Bassett spoke to Stewart about what they did to his script. He said, "Ian, we took your fantastic script and produced a piece of grade B garbage. Sorry." Stewart wasn't happy with what they did to his script, but he sold it to them and didn't have any say in the directions it went. He wished they would have kept what he wrote, because to him it was genuine, a sad tale of a broken child. Instead, it became the story of a perverted adolescent kid that frequently veered into comedy for comedy's sake. Even though everyone hoped this film would be a launchpad to something greater, it wasn't. Lew Lehman never directed again. He sadly died of a heart attack in 2000 at 66. John F. Bassett produced one more film, Spring Fever, in 1986. He sadly died of cancer that same year at 47. Sammy Snyders did one episode of the TV show The Littlest Hobo, and then quit acting to return to dance. Dance was his one true love, so he became an instructor and eventually settled down to start a family. He's proud of his performance in The Pit. Jeannie Ellis continued acting in movies like Nomads and Blind Date. After roughly 25 years of acting, she retired to focus on her one true passion, voice acting. She's been in everything from the Super Mario Bros. Super Show to Jumanji, to video games like Mass Effect, The Elder Scrolls Online, and Final Fantasy XIII. She also teaches voice acting lessons on the side. Sonia Smits was in Videodrome, Odyssey 5, and just recently in the TV series Mary Kills People. Ian Stewart continued screenwriting. He was paid for his work, but unfortunately the vast majority of his scripts have never gone into production. He said that one day he'd like to write The Pit 2 as a way to fix what happened to his original script. He's spoken to fans of the film who saw it when they were younger and it always stuck with them. They felt something was wrong with the film and wanted to know what was really going on. He told them the missing component was what the director never realized, but he inadvertently left just enough to keep the audience wondering, as well as slightly confused. In 1987, the Canadian-American co-production The Gate is released. It's about a young boy who releases a bunch of small demons from a hole he finds in his backyard. While it's unclear if they took inspiration from The Pit, they do share more than a few similarities. Aside from what I mentioned earlier, there were even more differences between the script, novel, and film. The novelization was much darker and even had some Lovecraftian elements. The Pit was located in Whatley's Copse, which was a reference to Wilbur Whatley from the Dunwich Horror. Teddy was also much more evil in the book. The book did a better job of explaining things, like how there were tunnels that led to other pits, which would explain how the troglodytes were able to travel and hide over the years. It's also implied much more heavily that Teddy's working with the creatures to get Jamie to feed them. This makes the reveal at the end that much more profound. The Pit is a bizarre film. It's definitely an oddity that shifts back and forth from borderline family movie to horror. Snyders does an outstanding job of playing the twisted kid, and Ellis shines as the babysitter at her wit's end. I do think they should have stuck closer to the writer's original ideas. It would have been more effective overall. There's so many oddball scenes that play out like a child's revenge fantasy.
Look at the look on her face. I'm gonna look at these a lot.
Snyders did the voiceover work for Teddy, which further pushed the idea that Teddy being alive was all in his head. Even though it would have been more drama, the horror elements would have crept in and most likely would have made it scarier. For whatever reason, Lehman wanted to push the humor, and while the end result is funny, it undercuts what could have been. It's enjoyable, and I can see why it has a cult following, but it had the potential to be a fondly remembered classic about a disturbed kid, instead of, well, this. I like it, but I can understand why some others may not. I can also see why Lehman never directed again. He didn't care about the film when he signed on, and yet still insisted upon making changes that no one else wanted except for him. Then he didn't have the guts to stand up to his wife to do his job. While I usually side with directors, in this case I side with the producer and writer, because they were the ones invested in this. Lehman didn't dislike the project, but I feel for him he saw it as a stepping stone. He had no passion for it, he just happened to be in the office when the producers called. The Pit was restored and put on Blu-ray by Kino Lorber under their Studio Classics line. It's yet another bizarre entry in the history of Kinexploitation, right alongside Zapp Rousdower.